This is BBC News. These are the headlines. Police in Britain say they've identified 4 British men they believe carried out the London bombings and think at least 3 died at the scene. Explosives are discovered in raids in northern England as it looks increasingly likely that Western Europe has suffered its first suicide bombings. Arsalan Iftikhar is with the Council on American Islamic Relations think tank in Washington, and he joins me now. A very warm welcome to BBC News.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the fallout could severely test the cohesion of British society, couldn't it? How do you think that we should best resist those stresses, remembering back to how you managed after 9/11?
Well, Martine, first of all, on behalf of the greater Muslim world, we want to reiterate our complete and blanket condemnation of last week's bombings in London, from Saudi Arabia to Iran to Pakistan to Indonesia to Washington, D.C. Mainstream Muslim leaders have utterly condemned these vicious and barbaric attacks as being completely irreligious and cannot be condoned by any civilized living human being. Now, unfortunately, the reality of what American Muslims and Arabs and South Asians have lived in after 9/11 here in the United States has been one of a duality where both our nation was attacked on September 11th, but then afterwards we felt the repercussions of hate crimes and backlash against our community. And I think that this is a very strong testing time for British society, which I know to be very inviting and very tolerant of diversity in this time of tragedy and anguish.
Scholars have issued a fatwa calling on Muslims to help in the fight against terrorism. I was watching your interview yesterday on Dayside about this. It's very interesting. Here to talk about what that means is Arsalan Iftikhar. He is the legal director for the Council on American Islamic Relations. Thanks for joining us today from Washington.
Morning, guys. You know how many people adhere to a certain ideology. The fatwa had an equally resounding message to the American Muslim community here within as well, because essentially what it was saying is that here are the leading imams and scholars of Islam in America, people who have been respected in the community for years, you know, telling people who might have criminal fringe intentions that they will be given absolutely no sanctuary within our communities here in America.
And of course we're going to keep our eyes on that. Arsalan Iftikhar, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Pope John Paul was the first pope to visit a synagogue, and he touched the lives of people of all faiths, as we've been saying. With us now is David Bernstein, Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee's Washington chapter. Also with us is Arsalan Iftikhar. He is a legal director for the Council on American Islamic Relations. And gentlemen, thank you very much for being here with us. And understand that was a particular affinity with John Paul II for Muslims. He was also the first pope to set foot in a mosque. How important was that symbolism?
It was extremely important. I think that, you know, the world has truly lost one of its most beloved citizens. In addition to being the first pope to visit a synagogue in April 1986 in Rome, the pope was also the first pope to set foot in a mosque. He visited the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, Syria in 1991, and I think Pope John Paul's legacy was to raise the level of public discourse when it came to interfaith relations worldwide.
The fact that he also disapproved of the war in Iraq and made no bones about it to even President George W. Bush, that also put him in a different place in the hearts of people in the Muslim world, didn't it?
It did indeed. It sent a very strong message because not only did the Pope come out in opposition to the war, but he said that the ramifications of the war may lead to greater religious polarization throughout the world. And I think that, you know, if you look at the legacy and history of Pope John Paul, his dedication to social justice and human rights have never wavered at all.
Well, nobody was killed today over those 12 cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad, which is not the same as saying the flames have gone out. With another huge demonstration in Beirut as the backdrop, the Danish government today warned citizens in Lebanon to leave the country for their own safety and, in the meantime, to stay off the streets. Officials in Egypt banned 2 German magazines for reprinting the cartoons, which, by the way, a government-sanctioned newspaper was happy to print back in October. The Malaysian government shut down a newspaper for running the cartoons. 2 Algerian news directors were canned. Those are the headlines. In a moment, the implications for a debate that so far has seemed like an awful lot of people talking past one another. First, though, CNN's Tom Foreman with a quick reminder of the issues in play.
While many Muslim leaders are denouncing the violence, they are simultaneously defending the outrage over the Danish cartoons. Fundamentally, they say, observant Muslims believe any depiction of the Prophet Muhammad or any other religious figures is forbidden. Muslim scholars say there is no specific law about this in the Quran, but they have long given that interpretation to a Quranic parable which condemns idol worship, the same as the Christian and Jewish faiths.
In chapter 21 of the Quran, Abraham is speaking to his father and and other pagan worshippers, and he asked them, "What are these images that you are worshiping?" And they say that these are the images that our fathers worshipped. And he said that I can tell you that you and your fathers have been in manifest error.
However, the simple truth is Muhammad has been depicted before by both Muslim and non-Muslim artists. Paintings intended to honor the Prophet have shown him sometimes with, sometimes without a face, and they hang in museums around the globe. The U.S. Supreme Court features an image of Muhammad honoring his contributions to law. Muslim leaders say certainly there is a huge difference between a respectful depiction of their prophet, even if they find that wrong, and the vilifying cartoons from Denmark. But they also point out their faith forbids the kind of violence that has followed. These are not faithful Muslims, they say, and they don't believe religion is even behind these rallies in already tense, troubled parts of the Muslim world. Do you think that these protests are fundamentally about these cartoons at all?
It was a straw that broke the camel's back because of all the grievances that these people have, both against their government and what they perceive to be, a hegemonic foreign policy coming from the West.
Good morning. Can they hear you now? Should the government be tracking phone calls made in this country? Some say it's crucial in the war on terror, but is it legal?
So how do everyday Americans feel about this issue? We're going to have a discussion with people from various backgrounds and differing viewpoints coming up.
Okay, and Arsalan, that's got to worry you a little bit, because I know that you're very concerned that Muslim Americans will be targeted more than others.
Absolutely. Since 9/11, the American, Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities have been disparately impacted by the Bush administration's law enforcement initiatives. And I think that what this policy does is it really shows the true scope of these sorts of issues and how they should be of concern to all Americans. I mean, the question becomes not, can the government store phone numbers of average American citizens, but where do we draw the line? Are we going to turn into a police state similar to the KGB in Cold War Soviet Union? Are we going to allow the government to look through our mail, read through our email? Where do we draw the line? This, unfortunately, I think opens the floodgates, and I think that's why we've seen a lot of bipartisan opposition to this. This is not a Republican-Democratic issue. You see a lot of Republicans who are just as opposed to the wiretapping as progressive Democrats are as well.
New footage of one of the London bombers is released as British Muslim scholars sign a fatwa outlawing suicide bombings. In an exclusive BBC interview, the Muslim cleric Muqtada al-Sadr urges fellow Iraqis to show restraint.
Well, Martine, actually that's not the case. If you look at the case of Great Britain and the fatwa or religious decree signed by over 500 of the most prominent scholars in Great Britain, it sends a very, very clear and resounding message, keeping in mind that many of these imams run the gamut on the political spectrum from very conservative to very liberal. It shows the solidarity within Islam that these fringe elements, these extremists, these criminals, these murderers will no longer be tolerated, and we're hoping to do that on this side of the Atlantic as well.
But it still doesn't reach out, does it, to the radicals to try to draw them back into the fold?
Well, I think what it does is it sends a very loud message to them that what they're doing is completely outside of the fold of Islam, keeping in mind that many of these people are, have been brainwashed and have a certain pathology to their thinking. When they see, prominent scholars whom they've respected their entire lives, saying that, these are barbarous, criminal, murderous acts, hopefully it will resonate with these people, before they might ever consider even committing a crime.
Arsalan Iftikhar, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Tucker, anytime. Thanks.